What if I told you that the sun isn't the cause of your melasma? Welcome to my channel. My name is Ariana. I'm a functional diagnostics nutritionist. I specialize in skin health and chronic conditions, and I'm also the founder of Allure Wellness. So in my last video, we discussed the melasma root cause pyramid. This is a framework I developed so that I could just show people why melasma is so challenging to treat or manage. And I also wanted people to understand that it is reversible, but only if you have the right strategy. The fastest way for you to get rid of your melasma is by understanding all of the factors that are at play, primary factors, secondary factors, and keeping the external factors in mind as well. I also mentioned in my last video that systemic inflammation is a huge part of this component. And you're going to see that all of these primary factors that I'm discussing in this video are all inflammatory processes when they're out of balance. And that's essentially what you're looking at with melasma. You are metabolically not able to process your hormones properly. You're buildup in your body, whether it be from toxins, lifestyle factors, and then there's all these other things that can contribute to reinforcing these primary factors, which we'll discuss in my next video. Let's talk about estrogen, because estrogen is the most common reason that people develop melasma. So there are several different ways estrogen can play a role in your melasma. First, we usually see it with pregnancy. This is because your body is producing a lot of estrogen for fetal development. We also see this with birth control use. And this isn't just limited to oral contraceptives. This is any type of birth control use, including progestins. I know that some people think, well, I'm taking a progestin. That's a progesterone-based birth control. It's not raising my estrogen levels, but it absolutely can. It can bind to estrogen receptors and act like an estrogen in your body. And also, some women do develop melasma after they've discontinued taking birth control. And then we have hormone replacement therapy. For women who are perimenopause or menopausal already, some women develop it after they get on HRT. Now, if you're on HRT, you should be taking high doses of progesterone to counter the effects of estrogen, because HRT doesn't mean you're just taking estrogen. You should be taking probably about 100 milligrams of progesterone per 1 milligram of estrogen. So you should still have quite a bit of progesterone balancing out your estrogen. Let's just talk a little bit about estrogen and progesterone and their relationship. It's really important when you're assessing your hormones, your estrogen levels, that you do so in comparison to your progesterone levels. Estrogen is your skin darkening hormone. It can also be highly inflammatory if you have too much estrogen. That's why we need to always compare estrogen to its counter hormone, progesterone. Progesterone is the calming hormone. It's the hormone that you need to calm your GABA receptors down. It's also the anti-inflammatory hormone, and it's also the skin lightening hormone. Estrogen is your beautifying hormone. In fact, it plays a huge role in how healthy your skin is. It's why you have beautiful, plump skin in your youth, and then as you get older, you do lose some of that elasticity. Your skin begins to thin, and you start seeing some downfalls of losing estrogen in your skin as you go through menopause. Estrogen plays such a crucial role. It promotes collagen synthesis and sebum production. It enhances hyaluronic acid and skin thickness. It can reduce oxidative stress and inflammation when it's in balance to progesterone. It can also accelerate recovery through fibroblast activation. Estrogen also helps maintain that lipid barrier integrity. And it helps blood flow and circulation, and also it helps with skin tone. So excess estrogen can be highly inflammatory. It can cause oxidative stress in the body, and it can also damage DNA. And as you know, it can cause excess pigmentation in the skin. This is because estrogen can activate the melanocyte. This is the skin cell that participates in the production of pigmentation. So when estrogen levels are too high from taking birth control, you have an accumulation effect. Also, if you're not detoxifying estrogens properly, this can also play a role in estrogen buildup. Estrogen also increases melanocyte sensitivity. This also means that it can make you sensitive to UV exposure. And this is exactly what I mean when I say that the sun alone isn't the cause of your melasma. It is something in combination with the sun that's causing this pigmentation, this hyperactive melanocyte that's expressing pigmentation. And this can even mean that minimal sun exposure can be a major trigger for your skin. And this is why when you go out in the sun, you can see that immediate response in your skin. Estrogen dominance also depletes zinc and B vitamins, which are really important for balancing melanin production. All right, so now that we're done talking about estrogen, let's talk about prolactin. Prolactin could be a really good reason why if you're struggling with melasma after pregnancy. This is not very often talked about, but prolactin has the ability to stimulate melanocyte activity through several different mechanisms. So there are prolactin receptors that are directly on melanocytes, and when you have elevated prolactin levels, this can stimulate those receptors, which then stimulate melanin synthesis, creating pigmentation in the skin. Prolactin can also increase alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone. This is a potent melanogenic hormone. Prolactin also has the ability to raise your estrogen levels. So when you're nursing, you're not only creating more prolactin for that lactation, but you're also producing more estrogen at that time as well. And now you have a double whammy for your melasma. Elevated prolactin can actually be highly inflammatory for your body. It can cause oxidative stress. And of course, we know that inflammation, oxidative stress also contribute to pigmentation directly by stimulating that melanocyte. Prolactin isn't just for breastfeeding women. In fact, prolactin has a really important relationship with cortisol, your stress hormone, as well. And we also see elevated prolactin in conditions like PCOS, hypothyroidism, and even SSRI use. But I'm going to get into all of this. Now, let's talk about cortisol, your stress hormone, and the HPA axis. We have acute stress and then we have chronic stress. Acute stress is a short-lived stressful experience, in which case your body is able to adapt back into its balance after that stressful experience. Then we have chronic stress, and chronic stress is a period of time, could be a month, could be 2 months, could be 6 months, could be a year, that you're under prolonged stress, keeping that HPA axis activated, producing stress. It's your body's fight or flight response that's wanting to save you from whatever is going on. So when you have chronic stress, cortisol suppresses the immune system because it's telling your body that it needs to save you from whatever is going on. Another thing that chronic stress can do is it can also suppress progesterone production as well. It tells your body that this is not the time to reproduce. This is the time to fight and figure out how it's going to save you from whatever is happening in your life. So with high cortisol or chronic stress, we're looking at lowered immune function and lowered progesterone production as well. Cortisol and progesterone do share a precursor hormone as well that's called pregnenolone. So I'm going to put up a diagram here so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Explaining it can be a little bit hard to follow without some kind of a visual. So this is the brain-skin axis. This is where the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA axis, interacts with the skin. And this is how cortisol, your stress hormone, directly impacts pigmentation. So we have the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus releases corticotropic releasing hormone, also called CRH. CRH then signals to the pituitary gland to release alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone. And as I mentioned before, this is a potent melanogenic hormone that increases pigmentation in the melanocyte, or the skin cell. The pituitary gland also releases adrenocorticotropic hormone. This is ACTH. ACTH then further creates more alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone and also signals to the adrenal gland to create more cortisol, all of which is able to act directly on the skin. So you can see there are several different ways that alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone can be produced along with cortisol at the same time. Now, here's a fun fact. You have about 20% of your cortisol that is made in your skin. Chronic stress can also elevate prolactin levels. The pituitary gland is what stimulates prolactin, and this is the pathway by which cortisol is created. So with high stress, you also have high prolactin. Another thing with high cortisol is that I mentioned it suppresses progesterone, and when you have progesterone suppression, you have the ability to elevate estrogen levels or reinforce elevating those estrogen levels as well. Now I want to talk a little bit about testosterone. Testosterone is also not very often talked about in terms of melasma, but testosterone is in fact a potent stimulator of pigmentation as well. And the reason is because testosterone can convert to DHT, which is dihydrotestosterone. Dihydrotestosterone is a potent androgen. These androgens can also stimulate the melanocyte, creating more pigmentation. Another thing that testosterone can do when you have elevated testosterone is sometimes you can convert that testosterone via aromatization into estrogen. So with elevated testosterone, if you're converting your testosterone into estrogen, you have elevated estrogen. And when you have high levels of DHT, it can also suppress the sex hormone binding globulin, which means you have more free testosterone circulating. And this can increase the chance of pigmentation production as well. So testosterone actually plays a bigger role than most people understand when we're talking about pigmentation. So let's talk a little bit about insulin. Insulin is also one of those hormones that people don't really associate with pigmentation and especially melasma. So when you're eating a large amount of carbs or refined sugars, your insulin will stay elevated, trying to bring those glucose levels down. And with elevated insulin levels for long periods of time, that can disrupt other hormones from being in balance. And this is what I mean when I say your body is an ecosystem. You can see how everything is so intricately connected hormonally. So insulin's able to activate pigmentation through the mTOR pathway. This is a key driver for cellular growth and survivability. It's also the master regulator of melanin production. You'll often hear about mTOR pathway in longevity circles. They're always talking about how to suppress that pathway because it is a controller of several inflammatory processes in the body. With higher insulin levels, you do also have that sex hormone binding globulin suppression as well, which means you have more free androgens floating around that can bind to melanocyte receptors. High levels of insulin can also increase cortisol levels. More stress hormone means more inflammation, more pigmentation. And of course, it's very possible if you have insulin dysregulation problems, you also could have estrogen problems as well. So I do want to talk about SSRIs here. And I know this normally goes in the secondary factors, but I think it's really important to highlight what a medication can look like being a primary contributor to pigmentation. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. These are meant to increase serotonin production, and not all SSRIs act the same. They don't all have the same mechanisms. The skin has serotonin receptors directly on the melanocyte. These are called 5-HT receptors. When you have excess serotonin in your body, it can stimulate the hypothalamus to release prolactin-releasing hormone. This increases prolactin levels. Serotonin also co-releases histamine from mast cells, and mast cells play a major role in your immune system regulation in your skin. So SSRIs can also indirectly stimulate estrogen, which is probably what's causing that photosensitivity from UV exposure with the medication. And I would say that's probably across the board with almost any medication that has an ability to modulate estrogen, making that melanocyte more sensitive to sun exposure. Now, I'm not going to go too in depth about dopamine, but dopamine actually plays a huge role in tyrosinase activity as well. Some SSRIs do tend to suppress dopamine, and when you have low dopamine levels, it can stimulate tyrosinase through that L-DOPA pathway. And of course, with excess serotonin in the body and the production of prolactin, you do also have that high cortisol as well. Next up, let's talk about nutrient imbalances. And with nutrient imbalances, it can either be excess overloads or deficiencies. The first imbalance I want to talk about is copper. And the reason is because copper has a very specific relationship with estrogen. I know some of you think that the copper IUD is going to be the main source of that high copper, but let me tell you that if you've taken any contraceptive, this is probably the case for you across the board. Doesn't matter what kind of birth control you've taken. So copper is a cofactor for tyrosinase. Too much copper can cause excess pigmentation in the skin, and not enough copper can actually cause premature graying hair. Now, copper and estrogen have a feedback loop with each other. Estrogen stimulates the liver to create ceruloplasmin. This is a copper-binding protein, and this protein increases the carrying capacity of copper in the body, thereby increasing copper levels. Estrogen can also enhance the absorption of copper through the intestinal tract. So not only does it help you circulate more copper in your body, but it also helps you absorb more copper as well. Copper can also activate that aromatase enzyme I mentioned earlier when I was saying that you can aromatize testosterone into estrogen. Copper can also increase the sensitivity to estrogen receptors. This means it makes you more sensitive to circulating estrogens and increase the sensitivity to the melanocyte. So now you can see that copper and estrogen together, they have a very dynamic relationship. And that's what I mean when I say things like your melasma is likely not just one single thing that's causing it. It's several different mechanisms that work together and reinforce each other. Let's talk about iron. Iron is an oxidative stress amplifier. It can be very toxic when you have too much iron in your body. So iron actually facilitates oxygen transport and enzymatic reactions. This impacts skin tone and melanin synthesis. Too much iron causes inflammation, oxidative stress, DNA damage, and of course, this plays a huge role in pigmentation as well. And then we have zinc. Zinc is really important for melanin synthesis. And the reason is because it is the antagonist to copper. It regulates copper balance and tyrosinase activity. If you're deficient in zinc, it can reduce melanin production. And another thing to really take into consideration is that zinc actually binds to copper. So if you have high levels of copper, zinc is what balances that out. Similar to how I talked about the progesterone-estrogen ratio relationship, zinc and copper have that same relationship. Some other really important nutrients that are important for skin health, one is vitamin C. And of course, we know this from doing topical vitamin C on the skin and its wonderful benefits topically, but you also want to take it internally. Vitamin C is a potent antioxidant that can inhibit tyrosinase activity and kind of calm that melanin production down. If you're deficient in vitamin C, that can definitely cause oxidative stress and more inflammation in the body. We also have vitamin A. It regulates keratinocyte turnover and melanocyte activity. If you have a deficiency in vitamin A, it can definitely lead to uneven skin tone and pigmentation. And of course, as you know, if you have too much vitamin A, it can cause an increased sensitivity to UV exposure. That's why you don't go outside with your retinols, or you have to wear sunscreen when you're using retinols, because those are a form or derivative of vitamin A. Let's talk about toxin accumulation. Now, this is a super important topic for skin health in general, not just for pigmentation. When the body is overloaded with toxins, this can overwhelm the detoxification system. And this is not just the liver. When the detox pathways are backed up, this causes more inflammation and oxidative stress, both of which cause melanocyte activity. We are exposed to toxins every single day, in fact, thousands of them. Everything from pesticides to heavy metals, even in your lifestyle, there's food additives, laundry detergent, cleaning products, and even cosmetic ingredients. When you have an accumulation of oxidative stress and inflammation, this causes more reactive oxygen species. ROS are unstable molecules that can damage cells and attack DNA. And some of this DNA damage can happen directly in the melanocyte. And when you have DNA damage in the melanocyte, reactive oxygen species can activate the mitogen-activated protein kinase pathway. This upregulates tyrosinase activity. Toxins can also trigger pro-inflammatory cytokines like tumor necrosis factor and interleukin-6. Both have been shown to be associated with melasma. These cytokines can stimulate melanocyte activity through the nuclear factor kappa B pathway. This enhances tyrosinase expression. So as you can see, there are several different pathways that toxins can stimulate pigmentation in the skin. This is probably across the board one of the most important factors for every single person, but you should be careful and have a strategy when you want to detox the body, because like I said, these can be very toxic when recirculating and can make your melasma worse. Phase 1 is the activation phase. This is where toxins are turned into reactive intermediates. These intermediates are often more toxic than their original compounds. And when phase 1 is running faster than phase 2, these compounds will recirculate in the body. And then we have phase 2. This is the conjugation phase. This is where those reactive intermediates are then turned into water-soluble compounds for safer excretion. The conjugation pathways are glutathione. This binds to toxins and neutralizes them. Then we have methylation, which is important for hormone metabolism. And then we have sulfation and acetylation, both of which break down different hormones and toxins. And then we have phase 3. Phase 3 is the elimination process. The elimination process is where several different organs participate in eliminating or removing those toxins from your body. So we have the liver, the kidneys, and the gut. So whenever any of the pathways that I just previously mentioned, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, when those are all backed up, the skin can actually act as a secondary detox organ, meaning that toxins will try to push themselves into the skin in hopes to be eliminated. I've even seen this in some of my clients. When they're rushing the detoxification, you can end up with rashes, breakouts, and also pigmentation that's spreading and getting worse. And this is why taking just a liver supplement might not work for a lot of people, because there's several different ways in which you need to support the entire detoxification system. I also just want to mention that if you have toxins like heavy metals, these things are not often floating around in your body. Heavy metals store in tissue, and heavy metals need to be treated very specifically. They need to be pulled out or chelated from the tissue, and then they need to be bound and brought out of the body through elimination. So it's really important that you work with somebody who knows about detoxification if this is something that you want to focus on. And this should be a component for everybody. So we just went over so much information. I hope that was helpful to you. I know this is a very nuanced topic, and so I'm trying to break things down and make these connections for you as best as I can without getting too much in the medical heavy terminology. But I want you to understand how deeply connected all of these things are. So we just went over so much information. We discussed all of the hormones involved in pigmentation. We discussed some nutrient imbalances, how that affects the skin health and pigmentation. And we discussed SSRIs, or how medications can impact hormones and play a role in photosensitivity. And we discussed toxins and how important they are for skin health and pigmentation. So next week, we're going to go into the secondary factors and how those interact with the primary factors. Please like, share, and subscribe. That way, other people who are looking for these answers can find them as well. I'll see you next time. Take care.